What does it take to become the most famous person in the world? In the early 20th century, before the internet, before television, one face became more recognized than any other on earth. A face with a small mustache, expressive eyes, and a bowler hat. He was the first global movie star, a man whose character was beloved in dozens of languages. His name was Charlie Chaplin. But the man the world knew, officially, did not exist. There was no birth certificate, no formal record of his emergence. He was born in the shadows of the most absolute poverty, and it was precisely this experience that became the raw material for an art that would conquer the planet. His story does not begin on a Hollywood film set, but in the cold, merciless streets of London at the end of the Victorian era. Charles Spencer Chaplin was born into a world that seemed to come out of a Charles Dickens novel. His mother Hannah was a musical actress whose success was fragile and whose sanity was slowly fading. His father, a talented singer, was an absent figure, consumed by alcohol. For young Charlie and his brother Sidney, life was a succession of rented rooms, hunger, and the constant fear of the orphanage, the dreaded workhouse, an institution that marked the poor as a failure of society. This experience of extreme poverty became his school. Forced to understand the world to survive, he became a meticulous observer of the human condition. It was on the streets that he learned to decode gestures, postures, and the way tragedy and comedy danced on the faces of ordinary people. There lay the raw material for all his art. Salvation, however, came from the same place that destroyed his mother, the stage. The world of British vaudeville, known as the music hall, was a brutal and demanding environment. 2 performances a day, 6 days a week, for rowdy audiences that did not hesitate to boo a mediocre artist off the stage. It was in this environment that Chaplin, still a boy, learned discipline, rigor, and, most importantly, how to read an audience, to feel its rhythm, and to manipulate its emotional response. He joined the most prestigious comedy troupe in the United Kingdom, that of Fred Karno. Karno did not produce simple variety shows. He specialized in pantomime sketches, short plays without dialogue that depended entirely on the physical skill and comic precision of the actors. It was the perfect training ground. There, Chaplin honed his timing, his agility, and the ability to tell a complex story using only his body. It was with Karno's troupe that he crossed the Atlantic in 1910. America was a land of frantic energy, and it was there that fate intervened. A producer named Max Sennett, owner of the Keystone Studio, saw him on stage and offered him a film contract. Sennett's Keystone Studio functioned like a comedy factory. The philosophy was simple: quantity over quality. A new film was produced every few days, based on a formula of car chases, incompetent policemen, and a group of young women known as the Sennett Bathing Beauties. Everything was improvised, fast, and loud. For Chaplin, coming from the rehearsed and precise world of Fred Karno, the chaos was disconcerting. His humor was more subtle, based on building a character, not just on falls and pies in the face. Max Sennett even thought he had made a mistake in hiring him, finding the young Englishman too slow and methodical for his production style. Until one day, everything changed. Instructed by Sennett to simply put on a comedy outfit, Chaplin went into the wardrobe and came out transformed. He grabbed a pair of baggy trousers, a tight coat, a pair of huge shoes that he had to wear on the wrong feet to keep them from falling off, a small bowler hat, and a bamboo cane. To add age to his young face, he cut a fake mustache and glued it under his nose. In that instant, he did not just create a funny disguise, he brought a person to life. The Tramp was born. The character was the synthesis of all the observation Chaplin had made on the streets of London, combined with the comic precision he learned in vaudeville. The public saw themselves in him, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Within months, Chaplin mania swept the world. Songs were written about him. Comic strips and Tramp dolls appeared. It was an unprecedented phenomenon. However, Chaplin was not alone in the pantheon of silent comedy. He had a great rival, the only one who could be considered his equal in creativity and popularity: Buster Keaton. The two were the kings, but their styles were opposite. Chaplin's Tramp was pure emotion and sentimentality. He stumbled, smiled, cried, and pleaded for the love and acceptance of the audience. Keaton, known as the Great Stone Face, was a stoic. He faced a chaotic and violent universe with an impassive expression and breathtaking, death-defying acrobatics. Chaplin made the audience cry with laughter. Keaton made them hold their breath in amazement. This duality defined the peak of comedy in cinema, but it was the humanity of the Tramp that made Chaplin the biggest star on the planet. The creative control that Chaplin gained in Hollywood was not just a privilege, it was an anomaly. The film industry in the 1910s was consolidating in the hands of a small group of powerful studios, like Paramount and Fox, which controlled not only production but also distribution and movie theaters. It was a system of vertical integration that turned filmmakers into mere employees. In response to this growing corporate tyranny, Chaplin joined 3 other Hollywood powerhouses, actress Mary Pickford, actor Douglas Fairbanks, and director D.W. Griffith, to take a revolutionary step. In 1919, they founded United Artists. The news was met with scorn by a studio head, who famously and ironically said, "The lunatics have taken over the asylum." It was a declaration of war, a direct reversal in the industry's power structure. Creation would now control production. Chaplin was no longer an employee. He was a king in his own kingdom. This independence allowed him to work at his own pace, releasing films only when he considered them perfect. He was a complete auteur while his fame reached unimaginable proportions. A technological revolution was about to shake the foundations of his silent empire. Sound. At the end of the 1920s, with the release of the jazz singer, talkies became the new norm. Silent cinema was declared dead, but Chaplin disagreed. For him, spoken dialogue was a limitation. Pantomime was a universal language that made the tramp understood anywhere in the world. Putting words in his mouth would bind him to a single language, diminishing his reach. While the industry dived headfirst into sound, Chaplin made a very risky bet to produce City Lights as a silent film. But it was not a true silent film in the old sense. Chaplin embraced sound technology in a unique way. He composed and recorded a full symphonic score for the film and used sound effects to punctuate jokes and actions, but he refused to include dialogue. The result was a triumph. The power of his visual narrative is best exemplified in the film's final scene, considered by many to be the greatest in cinema history. The flower girl, who was blind and can now see thanks to the tramp, hands him a flower and a coin. Upon touching his hand, she recognizes him not by sight but by touch. She says, "You." The tramp forces a smile, heartbroken and hopeful. The camera focuses on his face for long seconds. No words could capture the mixture of joy, shame, and pure love contained in that look. It was definitive proof that Chaplin did not need dialogue. He would repeat the feat in 1936 with Modern Times. In this one, he used sound even more satirically, with the voices of bosses coming from screens and loudspeakers, while the tramp remained silent, a human resisting the oppression of the machine. But Modern Times marked a clear shift. The comedy now served a sharp social critique. This politicization of his art would reach its peak in his next project. In the late 1930s, the world watched in fear the rise of Nazism in Germany. In Hollywood, silence prevailed. The major studios, afraid of losing access to the lucrative German market, avoided any film that could be seen as a criticism of Hitler. The Hollywood Production Code discouraged controversial political themes. Making an anti-Nazi film was not just a bad business idea. It was a dangerous political act. That is exactly what Chaplin did. Ignoring warnings from other studios and investing $2 million of his own money, he produced The Great Dictator, his first fully talking film. In it, he played two roles: the dictator Adenoid Hinkle, an annihilating parody of Hitler, and a persecuted Jewish barber. The film was bold, dangerous, and ended in a way no one expected. Chaplin broke the fourth wall, looked directly at the camera, and, as himself, delivered a 6-minute speech calling for peace, freedom, and humanity. The king of silent comedy had finally used his voice, not for a joke, but for a plea that would echo through history. The world would never see him the same way again. The humanist speech of The Great Dictator marked the peak of Chaplin's influence, but also the beginning of his downfall in the United States. The world changed drastically after World War II, and the alliance with the Soviet Union gave way to the Cold War. A wave of anti-communist paranoia swept America, and Chaplin became a perfect target. The director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, who had been investigating him since the 1920s, intensified the persecution. Chaplin's FBI file grew to nearly 2,000 pages. He was accused of being a communist sympathizer. Ironically, one of the accusations was of premature anti-fascism. The fact that he had opposed Hitler before the US entered the war was seen as suspicious. The FBI's campaign was not just political, it was personal. Hoover used the press to tarnish Chaplin's reputation. The perfect opportunity arose with a scandalous paternity suit filed by the young actress Joan Barry. Although blood tests of the time proved that Chaplin was not the child's father, the validity of these tests was not accepted in court in California. In a trial that became a media circus, he was ordered to pay child support. To conservative post-war America, the tramp was painted as a rich, immoral, and subversive old man. In 1952, Chaplin traveled to England for the world premiere of his new film, Limelight. The film itself was a melancholic and deeply autobiographical work about an old vaudeville clown who loses his fame and his audience. Prophetically, the film mirrored Chaplin's own moment in life. In it, in a historic moment, Chaplin acted alongside his old rival, Buster Keaton, also playing an artist in decline. It was a farewell to an era. While at sea, Chaplin received the telegram. His U.S. re-entry permit had been revoked. To return, he would have to submit to a humiliating inquiry. Feeling betrayed, he declared his farewell. The king of Hollywood was, effectively, exiled. He settled with his family in Switzerland, at the Manoir de Barn estate. There he found a peace that Hollywood no longer offered him. 1957. He directed A King in New York, a bitter satire on McCarthyism and American celebrity culture. The film was boycotted in the US and was only shown there more than a decade later. But the political climate that banned him was not permanent. As time went on, the paranoia of the Cold War subsided, and a new generation of American filmmakers, who grew up idolizing Chaplin, began to question the injustice of his exile. In 1972, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences wanted him back to receive an honorary Oscar. At 82 years old, after 2 decades of exile, Chaplin returned. The night of April 4, 1972, was a monumental event. When his name was announced, the audience stood up. Chaplin, frail and visibly emotional, took the stage. The ovation continued, without stopping, for 12 minutes, the longest in the award's history. It was a collective apology. In his brief speech, with a choked voice, he simply said, "Thank you for the honor of inviting me. You're wonderful, sweet people." The reconciliation was complete. Charles Chaplin died on Christmas Day 1977. His legacy, however, is immortal. He was a chronicler of his era, capturing the transition to an industrial world and the struggle for dignity. The Tramp, his alter ego, became a universal archetype of human resilience. The poor boy from the streets of London not only became a king, he became an enduring symbol that, even in the darkest circumstances, humanity, grace, and laughter can prevail. The story of Charlie Chaplin is a reminder of how art and politics can collide. Now, we want to hear your opinion in the comments. Did you know the story behind the persecution and exile of Chaplin from the United States? What other historical figure, who may have been misunderstood in their time, would you like to see in a future video? Leave your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. And remember, the next adventure begins with you.